Let me tell you something that's going to shake you to your core, especially if you've been sitting there wondering why someone who pushed you away is now circling back, watching your stories, liking your photos, or even reaching out after months of silence. You know the one. That avoidant ex. The one who said, "It's not you, it's me." The one who told you they need space, who ran the moment things got real. And you, if you're the anxious one, you probably bent over backwards trying to make it work. You held on longer than you should have. You texted when you knew you shouldn't. You explained yourself, justified your feelings, begged to be understood. Because deep down, all you ever wanted was to feel safe, seen, and chosen. But then, bam, they walked away. Here's the kicker. That same avoidant ex who once rejected you? Yeah, they miss you. Why? Because avoidants are not immune to love. They're not cold-hearted. They're not broken. They're scared. Scared of being vulnerable. Scared of depending on someone. Scared of needing someone. So when you loved them hard, when you saw their flaws and chose them anyway, it shook them. They didn't reject you. They rejected the feeling, the closeness, the emotional intimacy they were never taught to navigate. And when they felt it with you, it was too much. So they ran. But guess what? When the dust settles, when the silence sets in, when your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was, that's when it hits them. They miss the way you cared. They miss the way you showed up. They miss the way you understood them when they didn't even understand themselves. Because here's what nobody tells you. Avoidants crave connection just as much as the anxious do. But while the anxious moves toward love when they feel scared, the avoidant moves away. That's their survival strategy. It's not logical. It's not mature. It's trauma. It's fear in disguise. And now that you're gone, truly gone, they're left with the emptiness they thought they wanted. And emptiness doesn't love you back. You see, you were never too much. You were exactly what they needed, but they weren't ready for it. And now they're feeling the weight of what they lost, because nobody else matched that energy. Nobody else brought that intensity, that presence, that heart. Nobody else stayed when things got messy. So if you're sitting there thinking, why do they miss me now? Let me break it down for you. They miss your emotional availability. They miss your loyalty. They miss your consistency in a world where they constantly feel unsafe. And the beautiful, powerful, magnetic truth is you didn't lose them. They lost you. You brought the kind of love that required courage to receive, the kind of love that mirrors someone's deepest insecurities and forces them to confront parts of themselves they've spent a lifetime avoiding. But listen up, this is not your cue to go back. This is your awakening. This is your moment to stand tall and say, yes, I was the one who stayed. I was the one who loved deeply. I was the one who showed up. And now I choose me. Don't let the fact that they miss you now trick you into shrinking again. Don't let it pull you back into a cycle where your needs are too loud and their love is too quiet. You deserve someone who's not terrified of your love, but honored by it. Someone who meets your energy, not just chases it when it's gone. And for the avoidants out there, let me speak to you for a second. If you're missing someone you once rejected, understand this. It's not just about missing them. It's about missing what they made you feel. Safe, seen, loved in a way that cracked open your defenses. But here's the thing. You can't love someone fully while keeping one foot out the door. You can't receive deep connection while fearing the very thing you crave. You've got to do the work, heal the wounds, lean in, choose growth over comfort, because real love, lasting love, it's not safe, it's brave. And to the anxious hearts listening to this, your love is not a weakness. It's your superpower. It's the spark that lights up dark rooms and warms cold hearts. You just have to stop giving it to people who don't know what to do with it. So stand up. Dust yourself off. Walk forward with pride. You weren't rejected. You were released. Released from a love that couldn't hold you. And now, you've made space for one that can. They might miss you now, but it's your time to stop missing yourself. It's time to rise. Let's go. Avoidants don't run from you, they run from intimacy. When you showed up with your open heart, your affection, your consistency, They were overwhelmed. They didn't know how to handle that level of emotional availability, so they pushed it away, thinking they'd feel relief. But what they feel now? Regret. Because when the fear settles, they realize you were the safe space they secretly craved. Your love reflected everything they hadn't healed. Your presence forced them to face their own insecurities, the fear of being seen, the fear of depending on someone, the fear of being enough. That's why it was too much. But now they're haunted by the loss of the one person who saw them fully and stayed anyway. They miss that mirror because it was also the map to their growth. You were consistent. You were emotionally present. You made them feel chosen even when they didn't feel worthy. And after the breakup, they realize no one else gives that kind of love. Casual flings can't compete. Surface-level attention fades. But the memory of you, that lingers, because you didn't just love them, you knew them. And once someone feels that, it's nearly impossible to forget. Here's the twist. They don't truly start missing you until you stop chasing, stop explaining, stop shrinking to fit. When you step into your power and say, "I deserve more," that absence becomes louder than anything you ever said. That's when they come back around, not because they've changed, but because they feel the loss of something rare. But that's your cue not to go back. That's your confirmation. You were never the problem. You were the lesson. Let's get one thing straight. When an avoidant partner walks away from a relationship, especially with someone who's anxious and emotionally expressive, it's not because that person wasn't lovable. It's not because they weren't enough. And it's certainly not because the connection wasn't real. No. What's really happening is far more complicated and way more about them than it ever was about you. See, avoidants don't reject people. They reject feelings. Deep, raw, uncomfortable feelings that come from real intimacy. That's the truth. That's the hard reality that no one tells you. And when they walked away from you, they weren't walking away from your love. They were walking away from their own fear. Here's what happens. You come into their life with this open heart. You're consistent. You care. You show up. You check in when they're distant. You're emotionally available, and that availability shines a spotlight on their walls, their armor, their survival strategies. You trigger something in them, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you're doing everything right. You offer them the very thing they never learned how to receive: connection without conditions, love without masks, intimacy without the need to hide. And that is terrifying to someone who's spent their life believing closeness equals danger, that vulnerability equals weakness, that attachment equals pain. Avoidants are often carrying old programming, childhood messages that said, "Don't get too close, don't rely on anyone, don't trust that love will stay." So when you come in with your big heart, your deep empathy, your need to be close, not in a desperate way, but in a very human way, it feels threatening to the part of them that equates closeness with loss of control. So what do? They pull away. They become cold, detached, critical. Not because they don't feel something, oh no they do, but because feeling it is overwhelming. They push the relationship away not because it wasn't meaningful, but because it was too meaningful. That's the paradox. That's the twist that'll keep your heart spinning unless you understand it clearly. They didn't reject you. They rejected vulnerability. Because vulnerability meant being seen. It meant dropping the armor. It meant admitting they cared. Maybe even that they loved you. And for someone who's been avoiding their own emotions for years, that kind of self-exposure feels like a threat to their very identity. You didn't scare them with neediness. You didn't overwhelm them with too much emotion. You simply showed up with a level of emotional intimacy they had no framework for. You handed them something they've always secretly wanted, but were never taught how to hold. And instead of leaning in, they ran. But here's the wild part. It doesn't end there. See, avoidants feel the absence more slowly, but more deeply. Time doesn't dilute your presence. It amplifies it. In the silence, in the space they thought they wanted, they find something they didn't expect: longing. Because your love, your presence, your emotional warmth, it didn't just touch them, it changed them, even if they never admitted it, even if they never said thank you, even if they left you feeling confused and not enough. What you gave left a mark. And now they're sitting in the aftermath of their own avoidance, realizing that no one else brings what you brought. No one else holds space like you did. No one else connects like you did. But here's what I need you to hear, loud and clear. That realization doesn't mean you go back. Because love, true, healthy, conscious love, isn't just about missing someone. It's about showing up. It's about taking the risk to be seen, to be known, to be present even when it's scary. And if they couldn't do that when they had you, if they chose comfort over connection, distance over depth, you owe it to yourself not to shrink just because they finally see your value. You were always valuable, you were always worthy. So don't interpret their rejection as a reflection of your inadequacy. It wasn't. It was a reflection of their fear, and it is not your job to fix someone else's fear of closeness at the expense of your own peace. What you brought to the table was rare. It was healing. It was bold. You dared to love. You dared to open up. You dared to care, even when it wasn't easy. And that's not weakness. That's strength. Avoidants miss the anxious ex not because they suddenly figured everything out, not because they've done all the healing, but because that anxious ex, the one they once pushed away, loved them anyway. You were a safe haven in a storm they weren't ready to weather. And when the clouds clear, they realize that what they lost wasn't just a person. It was a sanctuary. But here's the final piece you need to remember. You are not the rehab center for emotionally unavailable people. You are not here to prove your worth by staying where love is withheld. You gave your best, you gave your truth, and that's enough. So if they miss you now, let them. If they reach out, let them, but don't lose yourself again in trying to be their emotional anchor. Your job now is to anchor yourself, to realize that what they couldn't receive doesn't mean you stop giving. It means you get smarter about who you give to. You didn't lose when they walked away. You learned. You grew. You found your strength in the space where you once felt broken. They may have rejected vulnerability, but now you embody it. You own it. And that's powerful. Now go be proud of the love you gave. Be proud of the heart you have. And never again question your worth based on someone else's fear. You are more than enough, and the right person, they'll never run from that. They'll run toward it. When you walked into their life, you didn't just bring love. You brought a mirror. And I'm not talking about the kind that flatters or comforts. I'm talking about the kind of mirror that reflects someone's deepest insecurities, their hidden fears, their most fragile parts. You held up a mirror to who they really were, and for someone with an avoidant attachment style, that's not comforting. That's terrifying. Because let's be honest, most avoidants aren't aware of what they're running from. They think they're just independent, that they need space, that they're not ready for commitment. But that's not the full truth. The full truth is they've built an identity around not needing anyone, around staying emotionally distant, in control, self-contained. That's their armor. That's how they've survived. And then you came along. You, with your sensitivity, with your emotional openness, with your deep desire to understand, to connect, to go beneath the surface. You didn't just love them, you saw them. You saw the things they hide from the world. You noticed the subtle shifts in their mood. You picked up on their avoidant behavior, and you didn't run. You leaned in. And in doing so, you cracked something open inside them they didn't know was there. Or maybe they knew, but were working really hard to avoid. You saw the little boy or girl behind the defenses, the one who once didn't feel safe, the one who was taught not to cry, not to need, not to rely on anyone. And here you were, showing them it's okay to need someone. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be human. But that's the exact moment things became unbearable for them. Not because of you, but because of what your presence reflected. You were a mirror that showed them where they were still unhealed, still guarded, still scared. And that kind of truth is painful to look at when you're not ready to face it. So what do? They project. They blame. They pull away. Suddenly, you're the problem. You're too emotional, too intense, too much. But you were never too much. They were just too uncomfortable facing their own emotional limitations. You see, love from an anxious partner often comes with a fierce desire to connect, to repair, to hold. But to an avoidant, that same love can feel overwhelming, not because it's flawed, but because it requires depth. It demands vulnerability. It asks questions they've spent their whole lives avoiding. Can I trust this person? What if I get hurt? What if I let someone in and lose myself? And the biggest question of all, what if I'm not capable of sustaining real love? That question right there, that's the one that keeps avoidance up at night. That's the one that creeps in after the breakup. That's the one that surfaces every time they think about you, the one who showed them what was possible, and in doing so, reminded them of everything they were still afraid to become. Because when you held up that mirror, you didn't just show them love. You showed them growth. And growth is scary for someone who's spent their whole life playing it safe behind emotional walls. And here's what's wild. They might not even realize all this consciously. They might still say, it wasn't the right time, or we weren't compatible. But on a deeper, more visceral level, they know. They know you touched something real. And even if they couldn't name it, they felt it. That's why they miss you now. Because you didn't just offer them attention, you offered them transformation. You weren't a distraction, you were a revelation. And yes, revelations are beautiful, but they're also disruptive. They force you to face things you've buried. They force you to grow up. And if someone's not ready for that, they'll retreat, they'll sabotage, they'll make you doubt yourself so they can avoid confronting themselves. But here's what you need to understand. The fact that you mirrored their truth, that's not a weakness. That's a superpower. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone has the emotional depth, the courage, the presence to hold up a mirror with love. You did. And you need to own that. Because right now they might be out there searching for something more comfortable, someone who won't challenge them, someone who won't demand emotional honesty, someone who won't reflect the parts of themselves they're not ready to deal with. But eventually, maybe not today, maybe not even this year, they'll realize that what they miss about you wasn't just the connection. It was the mirror. It was the way you made them feel seen, even when they didn't want to be seen. It was the way you reflected the version of themselves they could become if they were brave enough to grow. But that's the thing. Growth is a personal choice. And it's not your job to drag someone into their transformation. You're not their therapist. You're not their emotional babysitter. You're not responsible for their healing. You were the light, you were the truth, you were the mirror. And now it's your turn to turn that mirror back on yourself. Not to tear yourself apart, but to recognize the strength, the love, the value you brought to the table. Because if you could reflect someone's hidden potential, imagine what happens when you start reflecting your own. That avoidant ex may have walked away from the mirror, but you're just beginning to see the power of what you carry. So don't dim your light because it made someone uncomfortable. Don't hide your heart because someone wasn't ready to hold it. Stand taller, speak louder, love deeper with someone who chooses to face the mirror with you. You're not too much. You're exactly enough. Let them miss the mirror, but never forget, you were the one brave enough to hold it. When the dust settles and the silence gets loud, that's when it hits them. Not during the chaos, not during the breakup. Not when they were pulling away, building their walls, convincing themselves that being free was what they really wanted. No, it hits later. When the quiet sets in, when the phone doesn't light up, when there's no one checking in, asking if they're okay, sending just thinking of you messages, or fighting to stay connected through the disconnection. That's when they realize no one else shows up like you did, because what you gave them wasn't ordinary. You were consistent. You were emotionally present. You didn't just offer attention. You offered depth. You remembered their stories, saw the little changes in their behavior, and noticed when something was off, even when they didn't say a word. You gave them the kind of care that doesn't come from infatuation. It came from love, real love, awake love, brave love, the kind of love that doesn't just say, "I'm here," but proves it every single day, even when it's hard. And they didn't know how rare that was until it was gone. At first, they told themselves they'd be fine, that they needed space, that detaching was the right move. They convinced themselves that your emotions were too intense, that the closeness was too much. And maybe they even painted you as the problem to make the decision easier. But avoidance has a delayed reaction. They don't feel the loss immediately, not because they don't care, but because they're masters at suppressing their feelings. But here's the truth about avoidance. Feelings don't disappear. They store. They sit under the surface, unprocessed. And over time, they seep out in memories, in dreams, in the random moments when a smell, a song, or a place reminds them of you. They start dating again, maybe even quickly. They seek out someone new, someone who doesn't ask too many questions, someone who doesn't challenge them or ask for emotional depth. And for a while, that feels easy, safe, controlled. But then it starts to feel empty, and they can't figure out why until they start comparing. Not consciously at first, but they start noticing how no one checks in the way you did. No one really sees them the way you did. No one remembers the details like you did. And that emotional void becomes impossible to ignore. Because what they had with you, that wasn't just comfort. That was connection. You were the kind of person who made them feel chosen, even on the days they didn't feel worthy of being picked. You were the kind of partner who stayed, even when they pulled away. You were the one who believed in the relationship enough to fight for it. And they may not have said it, but they felt it. Every text you sent, every conversation you tried to have, every time you reached for them when they shut down. They may not have responded the way you hoped, but that doesn't mean it didn't leave an imprint. Now, they're realizing something they weren't ready to admit before, that love like yours is exceptional, that most people don't care that deeply, that not everyone wants to really know them. They're realizing that they took you for granted while they were busy protecting themselves from intimacy. And now they're sitting in the emptiness of their own emotional armor, wondering why no one else makes them feel the way you did. But here's the thing, not everyone is meant to hold your heart. Not everyone deserves the level of emotional generosity you gave. You weren't wrong for loving deeply. You weren't wrong for showing up fully. That was your superpower. And just because someone didn't know how to receive it doesn't mean it was too much. It means it was too real for someone who wasn't ready. Now they know. And that knowing is painful. Because when you've tasted real connection, surface-level affection just doesn't satisfy. Flings feel hollow. Small talk feels pointless. Casual dating starts to feel like eating fast food when you've once had a gourmet meal. You didn't realize how nourishing it was until your body starts missing the nutrients. And that's what you were, nourishment. You fed their soul in a way they didn't understand at the time. You were emotional oxygen. And now that they're gasping for air in a world of shallow connection, they're realizing just how much they needed you, not in a dependent way, but in a deeply human way. But here's what I want you to take from this. Their realization is not your responsibility. Yes, they miss you. Yes, they finally see your worth. But that doesn't mean you shrink back into a version of yourself that tolerates emotional inconsistency. You were always the real thing. You don't need to prove that to anyone. What they miss is not just the connection, it's who they got to be with you. You created a space where they could be soft, be flawed, be human. You saw their potential even when they were stuck in survival mode. You didn't just love the version they showed to the world. You loved the version they were afraid to show even to themselves. And maybe, just maybe, that's why they had to push you away. Because being fully seen and fully loved is terrifying when you've been taught that love is conditional. And now, they're trying to fill a U-shaped void with things that will never measure up. Not because you were perfect, but because you were present. Because you were real. Because you gave a damn when it would have been easier not to. Let them miss you. Let them sit with the silence they created. Let them wrestle with the echoes of your voice in their memory. That's not bitterness, it's truth. You don't need to chase closure from someone who never closed the door in the first place. You were always open, always there, always loving. So let them realize in their own time what they lost. And you keep walking toward the kind of love that doesn't make you prove your worth, that doesn't punish you for being emotionally alive, that doesn't run when things get real. Because the love you gave, that's the kind people spend their lives searching for. And one day someone is going to hold it with the same care, the same intensity, and the same presence that you gave so freely. Until then, stay rooted in your power. Because what they miss is real, and it was you. Let me know when you're ready for point 4, and I'll bring the same energy and depth to it. There comes a moment, after all the silence, after the distractions fade, after the rebound fails, where the avoidant X finally sees the truth. Not your truth, their truth. The truth they spent the whole relationship avoiding. The truth that says, you pushed away the one person who truly saw you and stayed. And that realization? It doesn't hit them like a whisper. It hits them like a wrecking ball. Because avoidance isn't about lack of emotion. It's about fear of it. Fear of getting too close. Fear of being seen and not being good enough. Fear that if they let someone in, they'll lose themselves. So instead of leaning in, they disconnect. They retreat. They tell themselves they're safer alone, that they're in control. But you shattered that illusion. You showed them what real intimacy looks like. You brought love to the table, not just affection, but attunement. You didn't love the mask. You loved the human underneath. You offered a connection that wasn't just romantic, it was healing. And that scared the hell out of them. Because for someone who's used to running, love doesn't feel like comfort. Love feels like a threat, a mirror, a spotlight.